What's going on, everybody? Good morning. Most people who followed me over the years, listen to my shows, listen to my podcasts, listen to my videos, they hear me say and make this statement a lot that behavior is proof. And I'm sure some of you say, well, that's kind of a witty thing to say. Beeb's just saying that because he's trying to sound smart, thinks he knows more than the rest of us, or whatever. And I get that. I'm not really going out of my way to sound witty. I'm not trying to impress anybody with the way I talk or present my arguments. I'm not trying to act like I'm smarter than anyone else. I'm really not. But it's something I truly believe. If you just look at things on the surface and you follow a pattern of behavior that you see people make, then it's almost hard to not suspect that they're going to continue to act the way they've always acted. So until the pattern is broken, you're going to continue to have that opinion of that person. You're going to think that of that person. So if there is a pattern that indicates a particular behavior in somebody, then for me, it's hard to ignore. Guys know, said it time and time again, that I'm a huge Tyson Fury fan. Tyson Fury is my favorite fighter in boxing right now. Um, I, I like Tyson Fury. I think even with all his faults and flaws, I can relate to him a little bit with the depression. I can understand that because I myself have issues with depression. So I can understand how he feels. But in saying that, I just can't justify the things he says, his behavior, how he trolls. And I can't always believe what he says because he's so volatile. One day he'll say one thing, and another day he'll say another. And I think with this recent video that he came out with on Sunday, trying to assure and lead people to believe that this fight with Joshua was 100% going to happen when he really didn't believe that, in my opinion, himself, then he didn't really make himself any new fans, at least in the UK. Because in America, we tend to like the bad guy. We tend to like the guy who is the trash talker. And in the UK, from what I've been told by people over there, it's not really an admirable quality to be the bad guy over there. People tend to like the good guy more so than the bad guy. They like the baby face more so than the heel. But here in America, we tend to root for the villain in the movie. And Tyson Fury right now has painted himself as the villain in this whole situation, this whole scenario. So getting back to the behavior is proof, Tyson Fury has a pattern of saying that he's going to fight certain people only to change his mind at a later date. They really, you can't deny that. He'll say, okay, I'll fight this guy. I'm willing to fight this guy. I want to fight this guy. And then whether it be a couple days later or a week later, oh, I don't want to fight this guy. I'll never fight this guy again. Did it with Dillian White. Um, did it with Deontay Wilder. And he even led us to believe that he was going to, have that rematch with Klitschko. So he has a history of saying he wants to fight certain guys, and he never follows through on what he says he's going to do. A lot of times, I can't say he never does, but there's been many instances when he hasn't. And another thing that Tyson Fury has shown us in history is every time there's a rematch clause in a fight, um, or every time he has a fight with somebody, and there's there's supposed to be or perceivably supposed to be a rematch, he never goes straight into that rematch. He always has fights in between, or he doesn't, or he just basically doesn't have the rematch at all. He avoids the rematch entirely. We all know the Klitschko situation when they had the rematch clause. He was supposed to rematch Klitschko. They even had the fight signed, and they had the press conferences and all that. And then he decided to pull out of that, and then he went on his hiatus. Um, the reason why he walked away, opinions vary. He was under some heat with UCAD because he was under investigation for his alleged PED use, and the IBF stripped him. So there was a lot of clouds, a lot of issues over his head in that instance. But he said he walked away from the sport because of depression. But one has to wonder if all those other things played a factor in him walking away too. Would he have been able to fight while under investigation? Probably not in the UK, but it remains to be seen what the US would have allowed him to do. So we can just look at the history. Has not fulfilled rematch clauses in the past. He's just, and after the first Deontay Wilder fight, it was a draw, so that rematch clause got voided out. But the perception was he led everyone to believe that they were going to go straight into that second fight. And what did he end up doing? He ended up having 2 fights in between before going into that rematch. Same thing with Derek Chisora. He had a fight with Derek Chisora. Then he waited a couple years before he had the rematch with Derek Chisora. So in this most recent situation, with Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua, if people remember, Deontay Wilder went quiet for a while, and nobody knew whether he was going to come back at all. Some people even suspected he may even have wanted to retire, or he may have wanted to come back against a lesser opponent instead of going straight into a rematch with Tyson Fury, because he was quiet for so long. He wasn't saying anything. That was the perception. So I think Team Fury weren't sure that Wilder was going to come back. They weren't sure that he was ready to come back. They weren't sure that he wanted to come back against them. I was having those same thoughts myself. I wasn't entirely sure whether Wilder wanted to come back. I wasn't entirely sure whether he wanted the rematch with Fury. I suspected that possibly he may not have wanted that fight because he was so quiet. He wasn't really talking about it. And Bob Arum all along throughout that whole time frame was basically saying, if we're going to do this fight, we're going to have to put it in front of a live crowd. I'm going to repeat a couple of things I said earlier in other videos, and even in interviews I had with Bob Arum. He had said to me that, we're shooting to have the fight and put the fight on in December. And then when that fell through, they even were talking about a February date, but they didn't start talking about a February date until Tyson Fury started talking about fighting Ajit Caballel back in December. They were in talks, and it looked as though the fight was almost done. It was, from what reports were saying. So as soon as it was known to the public, and it was, put out there by the press that Tyson Fury was going to fight Ajit Caballel, or his intentions were to fight Ajit Caballel, and that there were negotiations between the two camps, that's when Deontay Wilder came out and said, no, you can't fight this guy. You owe me a rematch. So he broke his silence. And then shortly thereafter, the arbitration process began. So Tyson Fury, in my opinion, and judging by his history, always wanted to have a tune-up fight. He didn't want to go straight into a tougher fight. He didn't want to go straight into a Joshua fight. And I think there was doubt on whether or not Wilder was going to come back or not. So I think Top Rank and Tyson Fury said, well, we're not going to wait around for this guy. Why don't we just take a quick tune-up and then we can have a potential showdown with Anthony Joshua? So in my opinion, I don't think Tyson Fury ever wanted to go straight into this fight with Anthony Joshua. All along, they wanted a fight in between. Okay. And they were indicating as much. They were saying that, he's been off. Tyson Fury had said, and even Bob Arum had said, and Frank Warren had said he's been off for a long period of time. We didn't want to put this fight on with Wilder without a live crowd because we didn't want to leave money on the table to pay these guys what they deserve for a fight of this magnitude. We would have to put it in front of a live crowd. This was what they were saying to us. Okay. So while they were waiting for a big fight or for them to have a big fight, for a big fight to be presented to them where they could, in order for the fight to be big enough to pay the participants what each would be worth, it would have to be with the live gate. It would have to be in front of a crowd. It would have to be under non-COVID restrictions. So the COVID restrictions would have had to have been lifted in order for them to put on a big fight the way they wanted to. So they did not want to put on a big fight under these COVID conditions. They did not want to have a Fury Wilder fight or a Fury Joshua fight if they could not put it in front of a live crowd and maximize the revenue. That's what the evidence suggests, right? And that's what Fury's history has suggested, that he doesn't usually go right back directly into the rematch after he fights a guy one time. There's usually some fights in between. So that's the history there with that. And then Bob Arum's language all along about how we want to put this fight in front of a live crowd. It wouldn't make sense. We can't do this fight without a live crowd because we wouldn't be able to pay the fighters what they're worth, right? Bob Arum saw how successful the second fight was, and maybe the third fight wouldn't have been as successful as the second fight, but it would still be a pretty lucrative big fight. So I never, ever thought that Tyson Fury wanted to go directly into this fight with Anthony Joshua, given what was being said, given his past behavior. And then once they went into arbitration, I think the realization, whether they want to admit it or not, the realization that they were going to have to fight Deontay Wilder next, I think that realization was pretty clear in their minds. I don't believe for a second Bob Arum thought that he was going to win this arbitration. Again, my opinion. It's just my opinion. That's the reason why they continued to stall. And that's why Bob Arum was never, ever putting any effort into really making this Fury Joshua fight. I think he was playing the public all along. This whole thing that Eddie Hearn was doing all the work. Again, we don't know what was actually done behind the scenes, because Eddie Hearn was still traveling around the globe, putting on all these events. He was still doing what Eddie Hearn does. He was still putting on a lot of events, and he put on this Canelo Saunders event. So how much effort and time, I don't know. Again, how much money was spent? Who knows what actually went on behind the scenes? But at the end of the day, as I said before, we continued to talk about both men, right? We continued to talk about both men, Joshua and Fury. These guys were getting free press. And Anthony Joshua even came out and said that he believed Fury was clout chasing all along, using my name to promote his next fight. So, given Fury's history and his past behavior, and given the circumstances involved in this situation, given Aram's statements, given Aram's behavior, given Fury's behavior, I don't think they had any intention of going straight into this fight with Joshua. I just don't. I just don't, because they would not have stalled like this. And here's another thing people don't really take into account. So it's been confirmed that this July 24th date has been reserved at Allegiant Stadium, Raider Stadium in Las Vegas. Story was reported basically hours after the result of the arbitration. So the question comes, or the question arises, how far in advance was this reserved? Well, you have to use common sense here. Do you think that Bob Arum, hours after the arbitration, the next day or whatever, he just calls them up and they conveniently have that date ready for him? Does anyone really believe that? That Bob Arum could just call them up with such and give them such short notice, and boom, they have that July 24th date ready to go for him. Meanwhile, if you go and you look at their event lineup, they're pretty packed for June. They're pretty packed for June, and they're pretty packed for July. So they got a lot of shows, a lot of events lined up for the summer. So to even think that Bob Arum could just call them with 12 to 24 hours notice and just reserve that date, this was something that had to have been done in advance. It just doesn't make sense that he would be able to do that. He would have had to have done this in advance. So to sit here and think, for him to even think and lead people to believe that he really thought with 100% certainty he was going to win this arbitration, it just doesn't make sense. It would be very naive for anyone to believe that. But that's what he wants people to believe, because some people are out there saying, well, he didn't know if he was going to win the arbitration or not. Okay, but the evidence suggests that by his behavior and the stalling tactics and having this stadium reserved so conveniently, and announced that he had this reserved so conveniently immediately after the result of the arbitration were reported, it's just all too coincidental and convenient for us to not think or suspect that this was the plan all along. Well, why would he go into this fight when the other fight with Joshua is much more lucrative? But again, we're only going by what's reported. These numbers, 150 million. Some people are saying 100 million. You've all saw the interviews or listened to the interviews that I had with Bob Arum when Mark Kriegel reported that $100 million deal that Tyson Fury signed with ESPN. I called up Bob Arum and asked him specifically about that deal, and he said that deal was bullshit. He goes, even I don't know how much money Tyson Fury is making a fight. Same thing with Canelo Alvarez with that DAZN deal. $33 million a fight or $35 million a fight. And come to find, when he fought Rocky Fielding, he made $15 million. And then we come to find out that deal wasn't exactly the way it was reported. And that deal is no longer in place for Canelo Alvarez. So it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe these numbers that get floated out there when they're just not verified. And there's evidence to suggest that they're not real, because Canelo Alvarez did not make $33 million to fight Rocky Fielding. He got 15. So the way that deal was presented to the public by the press was inaccurate. It was inaccurate. So that deal was inaccurate. So to sit here and just believe that $150 million site fee was there or was real, to sit there and believe that Bob Arum's just going to go into his pocket and give Deontay Wilder $20 million. Oh well, he's just gonna take that money out of the purse that Fury would get for Joshua. Okay, but where's the money? There's no proof of funds. There's no evidence to suggest. All this is just basically just word of mouth. We're just supposed to just take someone's word for it that money is there, when history has shown us many times in the past, people who have dealt with that the Middle East area, the money has not always been there. Proof of funds was never provided. Binding agreements were never signed. So how much was done? How much work was going on behind the scenes? When you're seeing Eddie Hearn going around the globe, putting on all these other big events, how much work did he really do in trying to put this fight together with the Saudis? And he kept telling you week after week after week, we have minor details, but these details were not minor. They were not minor. To sit there and think and assume that they were just going to be able to throw this fight together so quickly, it's just irrational to think that they could throw an outdoor stadium together in 8 weeks. To think that it was going to be so easy to put this together in 8 weeks, right? For them to drag this out for months. And everybody was stalling. So everyone was just conveniently stalling all at the same time. So if Bob Arum never put any, according to Hearn, if Bob Arum and Frank Warren never put any effort into really making this Joshua fight, and he was doing all the work, whatever he was doing behind the scenes, we don't know, and they never ever signed a binding agreement, right? Then what was really actually being done behind the scenes? It seems to me that they just wanted to have people continue to talk about them, keep their names out there in the press. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to keep their names out there in the press for free promotion. And then when the fight actually does happen, then it's going to be bigger than it would have been if it were to take place now. That's just the way. That's just what makes the most sense to me. Because why would Bob Arum continue to stall this fight out? And if there was an expiration date on that rematch clause, and it was in October, as Bob Arum stated, then why was he still negotiating with Wilder in November and December? Why? Why was he still negotiating after that October date if the rematch clause expired? That's what you have to. Why was he still floating dates out there? I think there was a period of time, as I said, where they weren't sure that Wilder was going to come back, and they weren't going to wait for him. They were a little bit concerned that they wouldn't have a fight lined up, and then Fury would be inactive for a long period of time, and that's not good for Fury to be inactive for a long period of time. So that's why they shifted their attention and set their sights on fighting Ajit Kabayal. And as soon as they did that, that's when Wilder came out of the woodwork. So that's the explanation. They were intending on having a tune-up fight all along before going into a potential fight with Fury. And they weren't sure if Wilder was going to still be in the picture because, again, he went silent. Nobody knew if he was going to come back. Nobody knew if he was going to come back against an easier opponent. Nobody knew if he was going to come back against a tune-up. But one thing is clear. One thing the evidence has basically revealed to us. One thing the evidence has basically revealed to us, that Bob Arum really had no intention of putting on this fight with Joshua. Really had no intention putting this fight on with Joshua. This was all basically just the same. It was Mayweather Pacquiao all over again. Remember when Bob Arum, he put that deadline up on the website? They have 48 hours to accept our deal. And this is all publicity, guys. It's history repeating itself. It's all it is. Bob Arum, again, I hate to sound redundant. I hate to keep repeating myself. This is a man who was a former U.S. District Court lawyer, worked for the government. He's not a dummy. He understands how arbitration works. Okay. He knew the arbiter. Both sides had to agree to use this arbiter, right? They didn't have to use this arbiter if they didn't want to, but Bob Arum used this arbiter because he has a history with this arbiter. In my opinion, that's why he decided to go this route. And this whole thing with Joshua, in my opinion, was a smokescreen. Now, do I think Eddie Hearn was in on it? Here's a defense. Here's a plausible defense for Eddie Hearn. So Eddie Hearn, people, I've said this and other people said this. How could Eddie Hearn have been so stupid to not know that this arbitration was going to be an issue? Well, again, Bob Arum is a guy who's been promoting fights for 50 years. Once again, he knows Bob Arum's a lawyer. He trusts Bob. Well, he may not trust Bob Arum, but he at least respects his knowledge. So if Bob Arum is telling him that this arbitration is not going to be a problem, then he could be saying to himself, well, why would Bob Arum tell me it's not going to be a problem if it was going to be a problem? It wouldn't make sense for him to do that. Bob Arum has a history in law. He was a former lawyer. So Eddie Hearn could possibly be saying to himself, maybe Arum knows that this is an open and shut case. So when the results are given, then we'll be ready to put on this fight with Joshua and Fury. So I can give Eddie Hearn a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, but also part of me is I'm kind of torn with my feelings on Eddie Hearn on this because, like I just said earlier about him believing Bob Arum because of Bob Arum's knowledge of law and his experience in the sport. He could have just trusted Bob Arum because he believed that Bob Arum would have known because of his law background the results. Like he could have looked at the situation, and by him having that experience in law, that Bob Arum could have told him, yeah, this isn't going to be a problem, and we should win this. But Bob Arum, again, he's no dummy. He knew, in my opinion, that there was a great chance, and he probably knew that he wasn't going to win this arbitration, and he probably didn't care. Because then in his mind, he can just say, we're going to get this fight in with Wilder, which is going to be a pretty big payday. And then we can go into the fight with Joshua and get another big payday. So why not get Wilder right now, coming off a long layoff, coming off an injury, okay? Which we already fought this guy twice. We believe it's a favorable style matchup. We believe we can win this fight. We're not really concerned that there's a possibility we can lose here. Obviously, he has a puncher's chance, but we've taken that punch before in the past, and we were able to deal with it. So this is a pretty lucrative fight for a lot less risk than a Joshua fight would be. I still think Fury beats Joshua, but I think Wilder is a more favorable style matchup to Fury than Joshua is. But I honestly think that Wilder, if he's back to 100%, would be a tougher style matchup for Joshua than Fury would. So this is all about how styles match up against other styles. So that's why I think everything played out the way it did. I think that there was some degree of planning that went on behind all of this. To just sit there and say, oh, Bob Arum was surprised that he didn't win this arbitration. No, he's too well-versed in the law to not know that he was probably going to lose this case. And we still have to suspect whether or not there was an expiration date on this rematch clause. I'm starting to think that there wasn't, given Bob Arum's behavior. So behavior is proof. Look at the behavior. Look at the pattern. Look at Fury. Look at Arum's pattern. These guys are professional liars. That's what they do. They lie, they deceive. They lie, they deceive, and they mislead us. It's hard to believe anything these guys say. So, how do you determine what's true and what's not true? You got to look at behavior. You got to look at circumstantial evidence. You got to look at motive. Why is Arum gonna take this fight and leave and lose and not take the bigger money fight? We don't know how big of a money fight that is because funds were never provided. Proof of funds were never provided. We still don't know if they had that 150 million because from what I heard, the original group of investors pulled out and they had to go and search for new investors. Okay. Oh, we're dealing with the same people. Everyone deals with the same people. When again, I hate to repeat myself and sound redundant, but for the people who hadn't heard me say this before, anyone who deals with Saudi Arabia is going to have to deal with the Saudi government. It's going to have to deal with that monarchy, and then that monarchy goes out and gets the investors. So, if you want to be technical, yeah, he is dealing with the same people, but the same people he's dealing with. We're not dealing with the same group of investors that they dealt with in that Joshua Ruiz 2 fight. They had to go out and get newer investors. So I still am highly suspicious on whether or not those funds were there. I'm still highly suspicious on whether or not that outdoor arena could have been built in that short period of time. And I'm still suspicious on the COVID situation in that part of the world because there are some issues going on in that area with COVID. There's just too many red flags here. There's just too many coincidences here to sit there and just assume that nobody knew what was going on. Now, you could give Eddie Hearn, Anthony Joshua, he's totally free and in the clear here. He did nothing wrong. All he did was continue to say that this is the fight I want. He never guaranteed it was going to happen next. He never talked about it too much. He just talked about his desire to want it, and he just talked about how he was training and preparing for it if it were to happen. But the whole thing with Eddie at the very least looks extremely incompetent here. Okay, for him to just, part of me is saying to myself, he had to have known that this arbitration would have been a problem, or could have potentially been a problem. Part of me saying that, was the site fee really as much as everyone was reporting that it was? Because the numbers were varying. First it was 150, then it was 100. He never verified it. So for him to not come out and verify what the site fee was, for him to not come out and verify things, which he doesn't have to, but if you're going to give information out there and lead the public, then of course they're going to ask questions about it. They're going to ask you to verify what you're saying. So for them, for Eddie Hearn to be upset that people are going to grill him on things, you were the one that started talking about it first. So once again, I mean, all you got to do is look at the press, look at the websites, like CNN's talking about this, ABC's talking about this, CBS is talking about this on their websites. This is starting to get some mainstream attention. Both these guys got their names out there. Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, and even Deontay Wilder's back in the mix now. Now, if you go on and look on Google, Wilder's trending very high right now. Why people they? All you gotta do is do a simple Google search. They put their name out there. They got free press. This was clout chasing at its finest right here, guys. More so on the Fury side, but Eddie Hearn did a little clout chasing too. Because now they make Anthony Joshua look like the hero. and Tyson Fury looks like the heel. And whenever you have a good guy versus a heel, that's a can't miss, guys. When you look at history, yeah, you need a good guy, you need a bad guy, right? The UK loves to root for the good guy. America loves to root for the bad guy, right? We have the perfect storm here. We have the perfect storm here. If you want to be honest, we have the perfect storm here. So both guys are going to be taking interim fights. I believe Fury will fight Wilder. I believe Joshua will fight Usyk. I think the Fury Wilder fight will do some pretty decent numbers. I think people are saying that they don't like it, but now there's a little bit of intrigue because both guys have had the long layoff. Fury's been seen partying. People are questioning that when he is the champion, is his desire as great as if when he's the underdog? So there's a lot of intrigue going into this fight. Was Wilder injured? Was there something wrong with him? Which I believe that he was injured, obviously, because he got the surgery. But how much of an impact did that injury play on the second fight? Will Wilder be a better version of himself in this third fight? Will Fury be a worse version of himself in this third fight? That punch that Wilder has is always there. So I think as time goes on, just like with Mayweather McGregor, people were shitting on that fight, and it wasn't really. Obviously, they had they were very well within their rights to do so based on the competitiveness of that fight. But I think as time goes on, and once they start promoting this fight between Fury and Wilder and the history and all of the glove gate and controversy sells, guys, and this fight has had a lot of controversy hanging over it. I just think that this is going to be a pretty successful event. And it'll check all the boxes off. It'll give Fury that fight that he needs after coming off a long layoff, and he'll be fighting another guy who's coming off a long layoff, plus an injury, plus a guy that he just knocked out previously, plus a guy that he's fought twice that he knows. So again, it's a good and a better situation for him to fight Wilder at this particular time than to go right into a Joshua fight. He's indicated as much. He's indicated as much by what he said, if you want to take him at his word. But it makes sense. All right? Joshua's going to get another fight in, right? And then this is the perfect setup for the fight next year. Right? They could do it possibly in the UK next year. I think Bob Arum and Tyson Fury are going to try to bring it right back to Las Vegas and Allegiant Stadium. That's what I think they're going to do. Tyson Fury bought a house out in Las Vegas. He's spending a lot of time out here in America. They've made a concerted effort. As soon as he signed this ESPN deal, they've made a concerted effort to try to make Tyson Fury a name over here in the U.S., and I think thus far they've done a good job. Now, like I said, this recent move has made him look like the bad guy over in the UK. But now people in the UK may watch him just so they could root against him to lose. Now, there's a plot twist now that's added and thrown into this fight with Joshua. You got Fury, who was the bad guy who led the people on, and you have Joshua, who was the guy who always wanted to give the UK fans the fight that they wanted, but you had guys like Fury who were obstructing that, who were putting themselves in a situation where they couldn't do that. They made promises they couldn't keep. Like Fury made a promise he made a promise he couldn't keep. And the UK fans are going to hold him accountable for that. They're going to be mad at him. There's going to be a lot of UK fans that give Eddie Hearn a pass because then they're going to just say, well, he was lied to. And then there's going to be the other side that are going to say, well, he was incompetent. He should have known. So that's going to add a little bit of spice to this fight as well. So, like I said, given Fury's history, given the behavior of Fury, given the behavior of Bob Arum, it's pretty clear that all along they did not want Joshua to be the next fight. That doesn't mean they don't ever want to fight Joshua. That doesn't mean they don't want to fight him the fight after this next fight that they have with Wilder or whatever happens. I feel very safe in saying that the fight with Wilder is going to be done. this whole thing with step aside. Why? I don't even understand why that. Like, this is another ridiculous thing that has been floated out there in the press. Like, Wilder has never made any statements to suggest that he wanted step aside money. He said all along that he wanted to fight. He never came out and made a public statement and said that he wanted step aside money. Never said that. Never said that. And if he takes the step aside money, he goes to the back of the line. Because Anthony Joshua is not going to commit to fighting Deontay Wilder if he beats Tyson Fury, because he's going to go right back and fight Tyson Fury a second time. They wanted it to always be a 2-fight deal. So why would Wilder put himself in a position where he's going to get frozen out? And again, where is this ridiculous $20 million number coming from? Who's going to dig in their pocket and come up with that? And if they have no money in escrow from the Saudis, then how could Tyson Fury pay that? Like, oh, well, Tyson Fury? No, Tyson Fury doesn't. Fighters don't pay other fighters. Promoters pay fighters. Now, whether or not a promoter and a fighter makes a deal that the promoter is going to take that money they pay the opponent out of their fighter's purse, that's a different story. But where would this $20 million come from? This alleged $20 million come from? That is a bullshit fucking story. And it's irresponsible for the press to put that out there. Because I guarantee you, if I got on the phone with Bob Arum right now, which he's not, he's extremely hard to get a hold of, but if I asked him about that $20 million, he would say, oh, where did you hear that from? That's bullshit. Just like he told me the $100 million was bullshit. Right? Well, Bob Arum's a liar. Why do you believe him when he tells you things are bullshit? Well, because again, from a logical standpoint, where would that $20 million come from if there's no money in escrow and there's no proof of funds? Bob Arum would have to take that money out of his own pocket and give that to Wilder. Right? So what happens if he were to do that? Bob Arum took $20 million out of his own pocket and gave it to Wilder. What would happen if the fight with Joshua, for whatever reason, were to fall through? Then he loses the $20 million. Like, all this makes sense. Like, where's this money coming from? Like, they're going to pluck it out of thin air? The Saudis are just going to write Bob Arum a check for $20 million and just say, hey, pay Wilder so we can have this fight? Again, all this just doesn't add up, guys. It just doesn't add up, if you're going to be honest here. I don't think the step aside. Bob Arum came out and said that immediately that we're not going to pay Wilder step aside. So where did this whole thing about step aside? This was just basically a bullshit fictional headline that the press came up with. That's all it was. That's all it was. They have no evidence to suggest or proof to suggest that there was $20 million step aside fee even on the table. This was just something that they concocted in their own minds. It's never been confirmed. When Don King paid Lennox Lewis $4 million to step aside so Tyson could fight Bruce Seldon for the WBA title, Tyson vacated the WBC title, and Lennox Lewis fought for the vacant WBC title. He fought for the vacant WBC title. That's what happened. What is the upside? I repeat, what is the upside for Wilder to step aside? I don't think there's $20 million there to give him. I think that's bullshit. That's my opinion. And if you think I'm wrong, then prove me wrong. Tell me where that $20 million would come from. Oh, the Saudis still haven't provided proof of funds. They still haven't put any money in an escrow account. Why? Because they have a level of uncertainty as well with this whole situation. So again, let's just be realistic here. Let's just be logical here. All evidence suggests, at the very least, that Bob Arum was intentionally stalling this out and intentionally trying to float Joshua's name out there, float Fury's name out there, get people talking about both fighters. because he knows somewhere down the line we're going to meet up, and the fight's going to even be bigger and bigger. The more people want it, the bigger it's going to get, right? The more they talk about it, the more attention both fighters are going to get when they actually do get in the ring. All right? Again, use common sense. Do you really think Bob Arum, immediately after the arbitration, picked up that phone and called Allegiant Stadium and said, hey, you got a date available for us in July? And they just picked that date out of thin air? You think you can give somebody 24 hours notice like that and just get a date just like that? Let's be realistic. Let's be realistic. Does that make sense to you that someone could just call up Allegiant Stadium, Raiders Stadium right now in the summer, right, and just get a date like that? You have to ask yourself that. It's almost impossible to think that he could just call them up within less than a 24-hour period, and they're going to automatically have that date available for him. Think about that. That just says it all. That just says it all. That he could quickly have that date and that site set up in such a short period of time. Think about that. Think about that. So, I mean, this is just my opinion. I'd love to hear some counter arguments because I've pretty much addressed every single one. Why would they take this fight instead of the big? We don't know. We don't know how big that other fight was. We don't know if that other fight, if that site fee was even real in the first place, if they couldn't confirm it. If they had to change and use a different group of investors, there had to be some issues with the funds, or there had to be some issues with their confidence in putting up the funds. That's number one. Number two, in August, it's 130 degrees out there. You need, instead of putting it in an outdoor stadium, you need an indoor stadium. Would they have had the time to put that up? Another problem, right? Another problem, right? COVID restrictions. Would they be able to put that event on? How many people would they be able to? Would it be able to go to that event? How much press would be able to go there? They said they had the TV deal all set, but again, there would have been would it have made sense to put a fight of this magnitude on at that particular time where it wouldn't be in prime time here in the U.S.? So would it make sense for ESPN pay-per-view to put on a pay-per-view here in the afternoon when most people are used to watching pay-per-views at 9, 10 o'clock at night? That's another issue I think that Bob Arum was probably thinking about as well. Right? And then you have the arbitration, obviously. So there was just too many roadblocks here. Everything was just so conveniently, how this was just stalled and stalled and stalled and stalled. It was all just too convenient. It was all too coincidental. Everyone involved here could not have been this incompetent where they didn't know, or they didn't know anything, and this was just a surprise that this was going to be the result. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming here, in my opinion. I stress my opinion that Fury and Arum never wanted this Joshua fight next. They always wanted to have that fight in between, preferably a tune-up, before going into the big money fight. Because that money, they believe, in my opinion, will always be there as long as we keep winning. Right? And both guys are going to be fighting guys that Joshua is going to be heavily favored over Usyk. I feel comfortable in saying that he'll win that fight. I feel comfortable in saying Fury will beat Wilder. Whether it's more competitive or not, I still think he's got Wilder's number. I think Bob Arum feels that he's got Wilder's number. I think Fury believes he's got Wilder's number, right? I believe Fury feels as though it's better situation because both guys are coming off long layoffs and Wilder's coming off an injury. He believes Wilder psychologically may not be as confident as he was the second time. So there's a lot of benefits for them to go this route from a logistic standpoint, right? That's the thing. You just got to be honest. We just got to be honest here. We got to be objective. We got to look at we just got to look. We can't ignore the fact that so conveniently all these things just fell right into place. If Bob Arum was 100% sure that he was going to win this arbitration on Monday, then why did less than 12 hours after it was reported that he lost the arbitration, why did the news come out with this July 24th date in Las Vegas? It makes no sense. He would have had to, at the very least, call in advance to reserve this date. There's no way he could call this stadium with less than 24 hours notice and get this date. I think it's impossible. I think it's impossible. So I'm just going to end it on that. Bieber's out. Talk to y'all soon. Thanks so much. Be safe. Have a great day. And I'm sure I'll jump on at some point later in the week. Catch me tonight on D-Styles Roundtable at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure you catch me on Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern time, Ringside Reporter. Podcast with my co-host, Eric Lauda. Bieber's out. Talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.